What's going on, guys? My name's Josh, and I'm back today with another Shining Vale episode recap, episode 3. Before we get started, if you could do me a favor, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now you better watch out, because it's time to get this video started. Let's go. So yes, guys, we're now on episode 3 of Shining Vale, and I gotta say, I'm really liking the show, and I feel like the characters have all kind of grown on me now, and I'm really liking where the story's going. So we know that the show initially opened up saying pretty much that women are twice as likely over men to suffer from depression, and women are also twice as likely to suffer of possession over men. So we know that the initial first episode kind of opens up with that quote. So just from that alone, we know this, Ghost is really haunting and messing with Pat. We know Pat's going to be possessed in the show. Like, that's happening. And we're finally starting to see a lot of that in this episode. I feel like we're seeing the early signs of the ghost starting to possess Pat. And I really am getting into the story. And I feel like the ghost is pretty much the ghost is giving Pat what she wants. Pat wants to be able to write again. That's really big to her. And the ghost is helping her write. And in the ghost helping her write, it's making it easier for the ghost to, have Pat drop her guard so it can possess her. Which I just really like that. And and we'll get into the recap in just a second. But I really also like the ending of this episode. Definitely kind of reminded me of The Shining. So the episode pretty much ends with, Pat, she goes downstairs, Rosemary's there, the ghost, and Rosemary says, she's been helping, Pat and her have been writing, together, and they've had a long day, and then she pretty much offers, Pat a drink. Pat's like, I've been sober 16 years, but she wants to make her muse for the ghost happy because she wants to continue writing, so she kind of goes along with, okay, I'll take one shot. And I feel like this ending was the key to Rosemary, the ghost, possessing Pat. So pretty much the ghost was using, Pat's writing to help, get Pat to drop her guard. And now that, the ghost is offering her alcohol, that's really kind of like the key to Pat really becoming possessed. So I feel like at the end of this episode was, our first sign of seeing Pat really getting possessed by this ghost. Definitely reminds me of The Shining. So for those of you who have watched The Shining, Jack Torrance, so the character Jack Nicholson played, he was sober and he went to the Overlook Hotel and he was at the bar and pretty much the same thing happened. The ghost at the hotel, offered, Jack a drink. He ends up taking a drink, and as he takes a drink, he becomes possessed by the hotel. I think that's the same thing where, Pat took a drink, she took a shot from Rosemary, and yeah, now we're going to start seeing Pat possessed. So overall, I really like this episode, and yeah, now let's get into the recap. So the episode opens up with Gaynor and Terry both hearing loud music and hearing furniture move. So they both kind of go investigate what this noise is. And then they see a piece of furniture moving across the floor. At first, they're like, who's moving that? But then we see, Pat's moving it. She believes there's a ghost in the closet that lives in the closet, and she's going to trap it with by putting a piece of furniture in front of the closet door. Also, then the door opens and we see Jake was in the closet, and Jake was actually masturbating in the closet. We then see, Pat and Terry are back in counseling, pretty much because, Pat's still seeing the ghost. And pretty much Pat is saying, you're off in New York doing God knows what. And Terry's like, listen, I'm busy working. I'm working on a presentation with Catherine. And then Pat pretty much says, she doesn't trust Catherine. She's obviously jealous of, Terry's relationship with Catherine. She thinks there's something going on there. Pretty much the therapist goes back to, Pat seeing the ghost, of seeing this 50s housewife, and he pretty much says I think that the part of you that feels like a repressed 50s housewife, you're projecting that, and you're seeing this housewife because you're feeling repressed. So then pretty much he says that, he says she's, definitely high anxiety, so he's going to up her medication to give her some anxiety medication. But he says, I think, this 50s housewife is your muse. That's your writing muse. And maybe you should, tap into her a little bit more and see where it goes. But he definitely ups her medication. We then see Gaynor, she's at school. She's still hitting on her religious neighbor from the Chastity Club, and he invites her over for dinner. You can tell Gaynor, though, is not religious at all. She's really doing this just to, get this guy. Next, we see, Pat goes to a pharmacy. She runs into Robin, where she confronts her and says, why didn't you tell me this house is haunted? You need to admit to me that this house is haunted. Robin's kind of denying it. This whole scene, though, Pat is a hot mess because pretty much she's trying to deny that, oh, I'm picking up medication for something else. And then the pharmacist kind of announces that, Pat announces Pat's anxiety medication. She runs to get the anxiety medication. The pharmacist tells her, this medication can make you black out, and kind of tells her all the side effects. Pat just tries to get out there really quick. She ends up stealing lipstick, and she just looks like a hot mess. But it's a funny scene. Next, we see, Terry and Catherine are working on the presentation for a religious clients. You can definitely tell, though, that there is some chemistry between them. Later, then, we see Pat start to write. She pretty much takes her medication, and then we see time is starting to act a little weird because she first just lit a cigarette. So she has a full cigarette. Then time gets a little weird, and then she sees the cigarette is pretty much already smoked. So she kind of blacks out there a little bit. So then, Pat gets a phone call from Terry saying he forgot his presentation and could, Pat email him the presentation. Pat says okay, and then a couple seconds later, she gets another call from Terry saying, where's the presentation? And then Pat's like, it's only been a few minutes, and then she checks her phone, and a whole hour's went by. We then see, she finally sends the presentation. Then we see Terry start to do the presentation, and they're doing this presentation in front of all these religious clients. And as they're going through the presentation, they start to see it's a little bit tampered with. It's changed. And then he gets to one of the slides, and he tells the group that, they can protect their assets, so they can sit back and suck a dick. So pretty much, this presentation got ruined and it got tampered with. We then see, Jake interrupts Pat and says, hey, I've been calling you and you haven't been paying attention. And then he's like, what is that word on your computer? And then Pat kind of looks at her computer and she notices that she's on page 14 of, her book. So she actually wrote 14 pages and she doesn't really remember any of this. She tells Jake to kind of go play outside, and he's like, with my AR goggles. And she's like, yeah. So he pretty much goes outside and goes on a walk with, his 3D or his virtual reality goggles. We then see Pat, where pretty much Terry comes home and he tells Pat about the presentation, how he told the group about sucking a dick. And Pat kind of laughs and he's like, who did that? You did that. You messed up my presentation. She denies it. Then they realize that, Jake's missing. And pretty much then they go out to get flashlights, so they're going to go search for Jake. And then Jake actually comes home and he finds his way home. Meanwhile, though, while Jake was on his walk, he was kind of walking by stuff. He sees something on the ground. You don't really know what it is. He finds a treehouse, but he ends up turning home and doesn't check it out, but he comes home. So he was kind of lost in the woods there for a minute. All of a sudden, then Gaynor comes home, and then they realize, it's all shocking to them, that something's in the oven, and they pull it out of the oven. There's a casserole, and Pat kind of doesn't remember making the casserole, but she just pretends that she did. So she kind of also blacked out there a little bit there. And then we see the next day, Pat is starting to write again. She asks the ghost for help. And then pretty much also then on her computer, the ghost tells her to go in the basement. And then she realizes that the basement is in the closet. She goes back in the closet, gets an axe, kind of starts to break down the closet door, or pretty much breaks the wall, and it leads to a basement. We then find out that, Catherine gets fired, and, she's like, Pat's like, I don't know what happened with the presentation. Catherine's like, I do. Like, pretty much that, Pat was the one who tampered with the presentation. We then see Pat, so pretty much she breaks down the closet door. She goes into the basement. Terry comes home. He goes fight, and he actually sees all the broken wood. He goes into the basement as well, and then he finds Pat in there. And in the basement, there's a tiki bar. And he kind of confronts Pat, saying, like, I know that you were the one who, tampered with my presentation. The IT guy said that. And then Pat's like, listen, I don't remember. I've been kind of blacking out. And she admits to him that she's been blacking out, but she was okay with blacking out because she was finally starting to write. So if this was her side effect, she was okay with it because she was finally feeling good about herself because she was writing. And then pretty much she kind of calms, Terry down, and Terry roams up to the idea of the tiki bar, about fixing it up, and he just says he wants his family to be normal for him and for the kids, and Pat reassures him, like, we will be normal, I promise you. We then see Gaynor's walking home, and she's actually picked up by the neighbor, Mrs. He. And Mrs. He pretty much tells her, like, listen, there's something dark in that house that attracts a dark force that attaches itself to vulnerable women over the years. And she gives Gaynor a medal to protect herself. It's funny because this neighbor, I feel like, really knows what's in the house, but no one's actually listened to her. They just kind of think she's crazy. So then Pat wakes up in the middle of the night. She reads a text from her editor, Cam, saying like, oh, she loves all the pages. And then she hears music in the basement. So she actually goes down to the basement and she goes and sees the tiki bar. But then there's the ghost. The ghost pretty much tells her that her name's Rosemary. And they kind of talk about, pretty much Pat's asking, like, did you write those pages? And then Rosemary was like, no, we wrote the pages together. And they just kind of get talking, and they said they had a busy day, and pretty much Rosemary says she helped bake the casserole, but Pat was really the one deep down inside who sabotaged Terry's presentation. And pretty much then, Rosemary says they had a long day, and she's like, let's have a drink. And Pat is like, listen, I've been sober 16 years. I don't want to. And then Rosemary makes the point, have the 16 years actually been good? And pretty much she's like, you're not going to let your muse drink alone. And Pat, wanting to make her muse happy, is like, okay. She kind of reluctantly agrees, like, I'll take one shot. And Rosemary's like, okay, boom. They take a shot together. And then it felt so good that, Pat is like, okay, I'm ready to get wild. Let's have another. So then we kind of see Pat finally give in to the ghost, and she takes more shots. We then see the episode ends with kind of when we saw Jake on the walk and he saw something on the ground. We actually see what that was, and it was actually a human skull. It was the neighbor in the road, the little girl that used to live in the house, Daisy. So Daisy died on that property, and we see kind of Daisy's skull. So that's kind of where the episode ends. Overall, though, yeah, I got to say, I really enjoyed this episode. I do think, though, we're at the point where, the ghost has been tempting and really trying to get Pat to drop her guard down by, helping Pat write, but really in return, she's trying to weaken her so she can possess her. And she's trying to gain, get, Pat to drop her defenses so it's easier to possess. And it does seem that by the end of this episode, Pat's finally giving in to the ghost, and the ghost is going to start possessing Pat. So I think the episode ended in a good spot. I'm definitely excited, though, for this show. I really am enjoying it. I'm excited to see kind of where it goes next, to see Pat, starting to get possessed. It'll be interesting to see when Pat gets possessed. Is the family actually going to recognize this? Because I feel like the family is so oblivious to the fact that their house is haunted. Pat's the only one who realizes the house is haunted. No one else notices, which is funny. So it'll be interesting to see, does the family notice when Pat actually gets possessed and actually finally starts to believe her? So overall, though, I really like this episode. I'm really liking the show. But what do you guys think? What did you think of the episode? I really want to hear your comments. Are you enjoying the show so far? As always, thank you so much for watching, and please leave your comments below. Thank you.